Welcome to Malta. Today we're taking you to a small island right in the heart of the Mediterranean, on Europe's southern edge between Sicily and the North African coast. Malta may look tiny on the map, but for centuries it was a key piece on the chessboard of sea routes, navies and trade. With natural harbors and mild climate and unbeatable location, it kept drawing the attention of one great power after another, and that constantly reshaped life for the people who lived here. Malta's history stretches back thousands of years, like a mosaic of cultures. Phoenicians, Romans, and Arabs all left their mark here, and later the islands became part of the Kingdom of Sicily. And spiritually, Malta has its own origin story. Saint Paul is said to have been shipwrecked here, beginning the island's Christian tradition. And then in the 16th century, something happened that changed Malta's destiny forever. Emperor Charles V of the Habsburgs granted the island to the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, the Knights Hospitaller. In exchange for a symbolic rent, the famous Maltese falcon, presented once a year. At first, the knights weren't thrilled with the rugged little island, but they quickly realized its military potential. And in 1565, Malta became the stage for the Great Siege, when the Knights of St. John held back the forces of the Ottoman Empire. That dramatic moment is also tied to the incredible fortifications you can still see today. Because Malta truly is built like a fortress. The Knights of St. John ruled here until Napoleon, and after that, Malta came under British control. Its strategic importance really shows in the 20th century. During World War II, the islands endured a brutal siege and became one of the most heavily bombed places in Europe. For the bravery of its people, Malta was awarded the George Cross in 1942. And today we're heading out on the road. This is the first of our Valletta routes, through a city that was born just a year after the Great Siege of 1565. The location was chosen by Grandmaster Jean Parisot de Valletta, and the design of this fortress city was entrusted to the Pope's architect Francesco Laparelli. You'll find a map of today's route on our website. The link is in the description. If you enjoy walks like this and stories told along the way, subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss our next Malta episodes. And now, let's take a walk. Ready? Let's go! It's hard to believe, but Valletta is only a little over a quarter square mile, with around 5,000 residents, and it's absolutely loaded with history. We're starting where most visits to Valletta begin, at the Valletta bus terminus, Malta's main bus hub, right next to the city walls, and the Triton fountain. This is the modern-day front gate to the capital. Buses arrive here from all over the island, and thousands of visitors take their very first steps toward the fortress city from this spot. And this place has a great layered history. Where you see an open square today, back in the 17th century there was St. Mary's Magdalene's lunette, part of the fortifications that protected the approach to the city gate. During the British period, the defenses were dismantled and the ditches were filled in, and the area turned into a busy transport terminal. Then, in the 21st century, the whole entrance zone went through a major redesign as part of Renzo Piano's vision for reorganizing the City Gate area and its surroundings. Right beside the walls stands the Phoenicia Malta, a historic hotel often described as Malta's first five-star hotel. Its story even includes a royal chapter. Princess Elizabeth attended an event here in 1949 and returned again in 2005, this time as queen. But before we head inside the walls, let's pause for a moment at the Triton fountain. It's a surprisingly young symbol of Valletta. The design came out of a competition in the 1950s, and the fountain was completed in 1959. It was created by Maltese sculptor Vincent Apap together with Victor Anastasi. Three bronze tritons, mythical sea beings, half human and half fish, lift a large bowl, marking one of the city's most iconic entry points to this day. A few steps further on, we reach the City Gate. The one you see today is actually the fifth gate on this spot, built between 2011 and 2014, also as part of Renzo Piano's project. We'll enter the city by crossing a bridge over the deep ditch below, stepping inside the same way people have for centuries, through the mainland approach to Valletta's fortifications. And here's a fun side note. Did you know that until 1931 there was a railway running between Valletta and Mdina? It was a single steam-powered line that operated from 1883. The final stretch ran under the bastions of Floriana and Valletta through a tunnel, and passengers would emerge right near the old Royal Opera House. Ahead of us is Republic Street, the main spine of the city, running all the way to Fort St. Elmo, and that's the route we'll follow for today's walk. Republic Street is arrow straight, and the view down its length is stunning. But it's hard not to get distracted by the modern Parliament building, also part of Renzo Piano's City Gate project. Two massive limestone blocks seem to hover above the square on slender supports, and the facade is shaped like deep stone louvers that filter light and shadow. This is Malta's political heart, the Parliament of Malta, a single-chamber House of Representatives. Malta is a parliamentary republic. Let's head over to Pjazza Teatru Rjal. And right away you can tell this place feels different. It looks like a theater, but there's no roof, and there are fragments of classical columns, almost as if someone stopped construction halfway through, and that's not an accident. These are the remains of the old Royal Opera House, a grand British-era building that opened in 1866, designed by Edward Middleton Barry. For decades, it was one of the city's key cultural landmarks. But during World War II, history cut that story short. On the evening of April 7, 1942, the building was destroyed in an air raid. The columns and the stone base largely survived. Everything else became rubble. And here's the big question: why does it still look like a ruin? After the war, people debated for years whether to rebuild the opera exactly as it was. In the end, Malta chose a different approach. Not to erase the damage with a full reconstruction, but to keep the history visible. So as part of the City Gate redevelopment, Renzo Piano designed an open-air theatre set among the surviving walls. An outdoor stage and seating built into what remained after the bombing. The new venue has been hosting cultural events since 2013. Before we go deeper into the city, take a look at this modern abstract monument. It's dedicated to two people without whom Valletta wouldn't look the way it does today. Francesco Laparelli and Girolamo Casar. Two designers, one plan. Laparelli created the concept of the fortress city, and Casar, working on the ground here, carried that plan forward, designing and completing many of Valletta's most important buildings. The monument was unveiled in 2016, marking, among other things, the 450th anniversary of Valletta's founding. Opposite Pjazza Teatru Rjal stands Palazzo Buttigieg, Francia. More commonly known as Palazzo Ferreria, one of those buildings that catches your eye immediately with its details. It was built in 1876, in a style inspired by Venetian Gothic, but with a clearly Maltese signature. The distinctive wooden gallery enclosed glass-fronted balconies that give the facade its rhythm and lightness. Interestingly, the palace rose on a site previously linked to the order service area, hence the associations at the name Ferreria. A conventual forge foundry once stood here, in Italian Ferreria, where elements of weaponry were produced for the Order of St. John. The new palace simply inherited the name from the plot's former function. Continuing along Republic Street, we soon come across something very Valletta. Two churches almost side by side. In such a small city, the number of churches is surprisingly high. You'll often hear the figure of around 28 churches within Valletta itself. For centuries, Malta lived to the rhythm of religious communities, confraternities, and national circles. And the order built numerous churches and institutions here, forming a dense map of sanctuaries that still shapes the city today. On the scale of the whole country, Malta has hundreds of churches, well over 300. The first one we pass on Republic Street is St. Barbara's Church. It was originally built in 1573 for the language of Provence, and served as the church of the bombardiers, the artillerymen. Later it was renovated, and in 1739 it was completely rebuilt in a Baroque form. The facade was designed by Romano Carapeccia, and the interior was completed by Giuseppe Bonici. Right next to it stands the Baroque church of St. Francis of Assisi, completed in 1607. It quickly revealed structural flaws, so by 1681 it was effectively rebuilt with the support of Grandmaster Gregorio Carafa, whose coat of arms was placed on the facade. In the 1920s, the church was enlarged and a dome was added. Inside there are works by renowned artists, including Mattia Preti. The church also frequently hosts concerts and musical festivals. Pay attention to the corners of the buildings. That little figurine set into a stone recess is a very typical Maltese sight, a street niche with a saint statue, called a niccia in Maltese. You'll spot these niches on the corners of houses and churches again and again. They're not just decoration, but a sign of patron's protection and an invitation to pause for a short prayer. This custom has a long history. Research on Maltese niches suggests they become widespread on the islands with the arrival of the Knights Hospitaller in the 16th century. And in Valletta in particular, the tradition of placing statues on street corners developed especially strongly later on. And these figures could be practical too. Small oil lamps were often lit beside them, helping to illuminate dark streets at night, while the niches and statues themselves served locals as landmarks. Continuing along Republic Street, on the left we pass the National Museum of Archaeology. The museum is housed in the Auberge de Provence, a 16th century Renaissance Mannerist building, originally constructed as the residence of the Knights of the Provençal language. It's worth knowing that the Order of St. John was divided into languages, national and regional groups, and each language has its own auberge, something between an official headquarters, a residence, and a logistical base. In Valletta there were originally 8 auberges, one for each of the order's 8 languages. Some did not survive, including due to the wartime destruction. Others now house various museums and institutions, which we'll point out as we go. So what can you see inside the National Museum of Archaeology itself? Above all, it tells the story of Malta's megalithic temples, with descriptions, plans, and the history of their discovery, along with priceless Neolithic figurines. The most famous is the Sleeping Lady, often also called the Sleeping Venus, transferred here from Halfselfieni Hypogeum in Paula, just outside Valletta. You also come across elements moved here for protection from the Tarxian Temples complex, including stone blocks carved with animal reliefs and plant motifs. Continuing along Republic Street, the city's main axis, we cross Great Siege Square, small in size but highly symbolic, right at the intersection of the Order's history and the modern city. On one side stands the imposing Courts of Justice building, a neoclassical structure with a columned portico, built between 1965 and 1971 on the site of the former Auberge d'Auvergne, the home of one of the Order's languages, later converted into a court and ultimately destroyed during the Second World War. Facing the courts is the Great Siege Monument, commemorating the Great Siege of 1565. The 3 figures are not portraits of specific individuals, but allegories. Faith, holding the papal tiara, Fortitude with shield and sword, and Civilization, wearing the mask of Minerva. The monument was created by Maltese sculptor Antonio Scortino and was unveiled on 8 September 1927, on Victory Day. And behind the monument rises the monumental Co-Cathedral of St. John, the church dedicated to the patron saint of the Order of St. John. From the outside, it is surprisingly restrained, mannerist, almost fortress-like, echoing the mood of the order in the years immediately after 1565. Construction took just 4 years, starting in 1573, under the supervision of Girolamo Cassar, the order's chief architect at the time. Notice the balcony above the entrance, supported by massive columns. This is where the election of a new Grandmaster was announced to the crowds, supposedly amid cheers and a rain of gold coins. The central portal is framed by 3 coats of arms, that of Grandmaster Jean de la Cassière, the principal patron of the church, the Order of St. John, and Pope Gregory XIII, during whose pontificate the church was consecrated. And higher up in the central pediment above the entrance there is a bronze bust of the Saviour. The 2 towers of the facade became a model for later church architecture. Churches built to this pattern can be found in virtually every Maltese town and village. On the right-hand tower there are 3 clock faces, showing the time, the day of the week, and the date. The mechanism itself is the work of Maltese clockmaker Giacinto Clarisi. If you want to see it up close, make sure to upgrade your cathedral ticket to include the bell tower. It's only once we step inside that we realize this was a ceremonial church of the knights, built in the 16th century as the conventual church of the order, founded during the time of Jean de la Cassière and designed by Girolamo Cassar. Today it holds the rank of a Co-Cathedral because it shares that status with the cathedral in Medina. The interior is pure Baroque splendor. Carved limestone decoration, gilding, and a vast storytelling nave. Above your head unfolds a grand narrative of the life of St. John the Baptist. The monumental ceiling paintings were created by Mattia Preti, a 17th century master of illusion and theatrical Baroque. Above the main entrance you also see a lunette with an allegory of the Order's triumph, a visual seal of the Hospitaler's identity. And under your feet is another book. The marble floor made up of hundreds of tomb slabs, nearly 370 richly colored inlaid panels with coats of arms, Latin inscriptions and tributes to the merits of knights and dignitaries. Along the sides of the nave run chapels assigned to the order's languages. Exactly what we mentioned with the auberges, each community had its home in the city and its place within the church. Interestingly, these chapels also work as clever internal buttresses that strengthen the structure, and the space between them forms a corridor. Each one has a richly decorated altar and a painting. Many of these works came from the brush of Mattia Preti, whose tomb is also located in the Co-Cathedral. In the underground level there is a crypt. The first 12 of the 28 Grandmasters who ruled Malta are buried here. The tomb of Jean de la Cassière, Grandmaster at the time the church was being built, lies symbolically and quite literally at the very heart of it all, directly beneath the main altar. And finally, a truly extraordinary place, the oratory, whose construction began in 1602 during the rule of Alof de Vignacourt. It was intended as a space of prayer and preparation for young novices setting out on the knightly path. Its greatest artistic treasure is the monumental canvas by Michelangelo Merisi, better known as Caravaggio, the beheading of St. John the Baptist. This chiaroscuro masterpiece is the artist's largest painting, and the only one he ever signed. The rest of the oratory is filled with works by Mattia Preti, scenes featuring heroes and saints of the order, along with a richly decorated ceiling depicting the Passion of Christ. In the same Co-Cathedral, in the Caravaggio Museum, you can also see his second painting here, Saint Jerome writing, Jerome translating the Bible. And one important detail, Caravaggio was for a short time a knight of the order, and it's precisely that knightly Fra that appears alongside his signature. Leaving St. John's Co-Cathedral, we return to Republic Street, and after a short walk, step into another square. Today officially Republic Square, though in British times it was still often called Piazza Regina. Right in the center, as if nothing had changed, Queen Victoria still sits on her throne. Her monument was unveiled in 1891 to mark the Golden Jubilee of her reign, the 15th anniversary celebrated in 1887. She's wearing a shawl made of Maltese lace, a small detail that immediately says, "This is Malta, not London." If you come closer, you'll notice it's a monument with a story not only in history books. Locals like to point out tiny uneven spots and say that wartime blasts and vibration in the area may have left their mark. And along the way, legends grew about not entirely accidental vandalism. The fact is that for years some elements were missing, including fingers, and during conservation work certain losses were reconstructed. The rest is filled in by Valletta, which loves this kind of urban storytelling. Behind the Queen stands the elegant building of the National Library of Malta. It was completed in 1796 and designed by Stefano Ittar, with the work later continued by his son. And importantly, it was one of the last major public projects of the Knights Hospitaller. Inside you'll find not only thousands of volumes, but also priceless archives of the Order of St. John, so even a brief visit can feel like stepping into a quiet time capsule sealed in paper. And facing the library, on the corner, another Valletta classic tempts you in, Café Cordina. It's a family business operating since 1837, relocated to Valletta in 1944. Famous not only for its pastries, but also for an interior that's an attraction in its own right. Here the curiosity is literally built into the walls. Cordina occupies the ground floor of Casa del Comune Tesoro, the Order's former treasury house, place where back in the day truly weighty matters were handled. From Republic Square, it takes just a couple of steps further uphill along Republic Street, and we smoothly enter the next drawing room of Valletta. St. George Square, also known as Palace Square, because the facade of the Grandmaster's palace dominates the space. This is the city center in its purest form. Everything imported has always reached its climax right here. The square remembers the days when Carnival truly came alive, when public ceremonies and parades were held here, moments that still give you goosebumps when you imagine them, executions during the French occupation, and dramatic episodes from Malta's turbulent history. On the right stands the Grandmaster's Palace, the heart of hospitaller power. It was here that Grandmaster Jean de la Cassière established his residence in the 1570s. And over the years, the buildings grew almost piece by piece, absorbing neighboring houses. Then the British arrived, and the palace became the governor's residence. And today it houses the office of the president. Until 2015, the Maltese parliament also met here. And the details matter. In this place, history isn't only inside the palace, it hangs outside as well. On the facade you'll notice marble commemorative plaques that briefly highlight key moments of the 20th century and Malta's road toward modern statehood. On the opposite side of the square stands the main guard, originally the Grandmaster's guardhouse, built in 1603 and later under the British, also used by the governor's guard. In the early 19th century, the British added a neoclassical portico and a famous inscription, which in tone reads like a political manifesto of its era, about the Maltese people's attachment to the empire. Standing in the square, take a look as well at the two Baroque wall fountains, dating from the late 18th century, from the time of Grandmaster de Rohan. In a fortress city, water was absolutely crucial. Without it, you can't sustain people, you can't survive a siege. That's why bringing water in via an aqueduct around 1615 was a turning point, and the first fountains became not only decoration, but also a visible symbol of a city that truly worked. And one more powerful note in this space, the Sette Giugno monument. It commemorates 7th June 1919, the day when growing frustration over soaring prices and shortages of basic goods turned into protests and clashes. British soldiers opened fire, 4 Maltese people were killed. That shock accelerated change. Just 2 years later, a self-government constitution was introduced. The first elections were held. And to this day, the date remains a national holiday on the islands. Leaving the Sette Giugno monument behind, we continue along Republic Street. A street that leads us straight into a more private, at-home layer of Valletta's history. Before long, at number 74, we step into Casa Rocca Piccola. Officially, it's a museum, but the feeling is completely different, because it's still a real home, a 16th century palazzo originally built for a Knight of the Order. What makes it special is that it's the only private palace of its kind in Valletta open to visitors, while still being lived in. The host is Nicolas de Piro, the 9th Marquis de Piro. And that can be the best surprise of all. Sometimes you can meet him along the visitor route, and he enriches these beautiful interiors with his own anecdotes and family memories. Among the exhibits, the British thread stands out strongly as well. The De Piro family moved close to the world of monarchy. Traces of their involvement in court events have been preserved, and in the family archives there's also a Maltese chapter of the young Princess Elizabeth. To finish, we go underground. The visit closes with the haunting Second World War episode. a rock-cut shelter where old wells were converted into air riot refuges, often saving residents' lives during bombing riots. Our route along Republic Street continues all the way to Fort St. Elmo, but we'll leave that for the next walk. For now, we end today's route and our first meeting with Valletta, the fortress city. This is only the beginning, because Valletta's history has many more layers, and we'll uncover them step by step in the next parts of the walk. We'll hope you'll keep us company. And if you enjoy this kind of narrated walk, with details, curiosities, and history told from the street, subscribe to our channel and share it in the comment what you feel during travels like this. And we'll soon invite you to another walk through Valletta, this time toward the gripping history of wartime forts, shelters, and cannons. See you soon!
Hello?
Apa katanya, Jang?